The following interview segment was taken from Talking Wealth on flix.net. That's FLIXX.net. Talking Wealth is brought to you by Wealth Within and presented by Dale Gillham and Janine Cox. To watch the full episode, go to flix.net, click on the On Demand section, and then click on Talking Wealth under the Finance section. Or for more information, visit wealthwithin.com.au.
Eric Brotman, welcome to Talking Wealth. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Janine. Thanks for having me back.
Good to see you out there looking all happy and cheery, and you're obviously excited about being here today.
Always. This is always such a terrific show, and I enjoy our chats.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to our chat as well. This is an area I constantly talk about with our clients and students, and it's all about planning. And I find that all too often people get close to retirement and then ask the questions that they should have asked years ago, what they can do so that they can have more money in retirement to relax and enjoy a great lifestyle. It's no wonder why so many retire on so little then, and it's really concerning to us that that's happening. So I want to get into two subjects today, and the first one to get into is about strategies for managing a portfolio in preparation for retirement. So this is really important, isn't it, as part of your process when you're working with people, and when should they actually start planning that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you start doing your accumulation planning ideally when you get your first job, even if you're just a teenager. Accumulation planning is actually quite simple. As a math problem, it's a very simple thing. You put X dollars away for Y years and get Z%, and voila, there's money. And we've all seen the mountain charts and how much you can save and how much you can build. The challenge is that you spend 45 years or more of your life figuring out how to do accumulation. And then all of a sudden, you have to figure out how to use that money to create income for yourself. And it's a completely different skill set, and it's one that most folks are not prepared for and have never experienced. And so I think it's important to begin 5 to 10 years before you plan to stop working full time to converting your portfolio so that it's not all long-term money anymore. There's a point where you need to start thinking about, where is my income going to come from when I'm no longer earning a paycheck? Or when my paycheck is smaller because I've gone part-time, or I'm doing consulting, or there's a reduction in my income. I don't want to reduce my lifestyle. So how do I fill that gap by utilizing the mountain I've built for the last 45 or 50 years?
And what age should that generally happen, or when should people really start thinking about that?
I think everybody's different. There are some people who are shooting to be financially independent when they're 38. I know I wasn't at 38, but if you can do it, go for it. I really think for most people, the age is somewhere between 60 and 70, and it depends what you do for a living. If you're in a job that you can do until you're 80 years old and you love it, there's no reason to quit. First of all, I think it's good to stay sharp and it's good to stay involved. And if you love what you do, it's not work. On the other hand, if you're in a job that you really can't stand and you can't wait till the weekend and where it's physically demanding in a way that you're no longer able to do, I think that's when folks retire a little bit earlier, because they're, number one, they're enthusiastic about not doing what they do, and number two, physically it's difficult to continue.
We get a lot of tradespeople in that situation.
Absolutely.
Where
absolutely.
their back goes out, or they've hurt themselves. We've had people who have had accidents that come to us and say, well, look, I need an alternative way of generating an income.
Yeah, and it's good that they come to you, because that is a skill set we're not taught in school, and it's a skill set we've never had to use ourselves in our adult lives.
Well, people think that to generate an income, you need to have paid off property debt so that you've got rent coming in, or you need to have money coming from a bank account, but these days that's sort of to a lesser degree. Or they think you need to have stocks that pay good dividends, but it's not just that. It's just people are starting to see that you can actually buy and sell shares, and more so now than ever before. And we've talked a little bit prior to coming on air about those apps that people are using to trade, are not necessarily the right way that you want people to get into the stock market to be trading, but at least people are actually now looking at the stock market as a way to generate an income as well.
Well, I think people are looking at the stock market as, and we did talk about the fact that it feels a bit like a game. And that's because for the last decade, with the exception of the very beginning of the pandemic, for the last decade, things have been pretty good in markets around the world. And so there is an entire generation of folks who only know the gaming side of the market and who only know good markets. They weren't doing this in 2008 and 2009 when markets looked very different than they do today. So I don't think those apps are doing a good job preparing people to come up with income strategies. I think it's a way to create wealth, and I think therefore it's a good thing that people are investing. I think they tend to be investing most cases the wrong way. They tend to be looking for something quick and what's going to have a great week or month or quarter, and then let's get out. And so it's not the most tax savvy way to do this. There's drawbacks to it. I'm glad that it's attracting new investors to the markets. I think that's a positive. But I think the negative is it's not really educational as much as it is fun. And it's always fun until you lose money. Casinos are fun until you lose money, and then it's not fun anymore. So to me, the income story is totally different, and I don't think anyone should do this themselves.
It's creating a dependence. I think that what you were just touching on before, it's creating a dependence rather than building the life skills that people will be able to draw on.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I agree with you. And there's a difference between investing and buying and selling and trying to grow your wealth, and then trying to figure out how you're going to make sure you don't outlive your money once your paycheck stops.
Yeah.
That's a very scary thing, and there's no mulligan. There's no do-overs. If you're 30 years old and you buy a stock and it tanks, you're going to recover from that. If you're 68 years old and you no longer have a full-time job and you've invested in what you thought was a dividend strategy and things go horribly wrong, it's like picking fruit from a tree or from trees in an orchard. What you want to do is you want to have the orchard create new fruit every year so that you pick fruit every single year. There's an abundance. If you're starting to chop branches off those trees, every year you'll have less and less and less income. And ultimately, that will be a problem. It's a recipe to run out of money. And people they're really not trained or qualified to do that for themselves. It's a different skill set than trying to build it. Building wealth is easy. Converting it to income is difficult.
But you could have two streams, though, couldn't you? So you could have the stream that continues to build that capital growth and then have the other stream that's set up to generate the income.
You can. And I would argue that there are three primary strategies for generating income in retirement. And that the strategy that makes the most sense for you will depend on the percentage of your working assets required to maintain your lifestyle. So if you're able to live on 2%, for example, of what you're worth, you will never run out of money so long as you don't make catastrophic mistakes. And you'll be able to use a total return strategy where whether it's capital appreciation or income, it really is immaterial. You're going to have plenty of money to live on, and you'll be able to outpace inflation generally, and you'll be growing your wealth even while you're drawing on it. If your withdrawal rate, though, is 4%, that magic 4% rule that gets talked about, which really isn't magic at all. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if you're at that spot, that's where I think you have to start doing asset segregation. Where, to your point, Janine, you've got some accounts that are designed for growth and other accounts that are designed for lifestyle, things that you're going to live on. They don't have to be dividend-paying stocks or fixed income, or they don't necessarily have to be income investments. They just have to be something that you're willing to either generate income from or sell for your bills during that period of time.
Draw down on. Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely. So that's asset segregation. And so for people with more wealth than they can possibly spend, you have total return. For folks who are sort of in the middle, they've hit financial independence, but it's going to be work to stay there, you segregate assets. For For people who don't have that luxury, either because they didn't save or invest properly or because something went wrong and they don't have that kind of abundance and they need a larger percentage of their money to live on, that's when you have to start looking at income producing strategies. And they wind up being things like annuities and other things that can be very expensive and very complicated. And it's not typically the first choice. It's not in and of itself a bad thing as long as you understand it, but it's rarely the first choice.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of annuities in the past that really don't help the individual, in my opinion. While they might promise this is the return, you're actually not making anything on them.
That can be true. It's not always true. Like anything else, there are tools in the toolbox, and sometimes those tools are appropriate and sometimes they're not. And if you have the wherewithal to not need that kind of income strategy or that kind of defense mechanism, you're better off.
Yeah.
It would be better not to need that. But if you do need it, thank goodness those kinds of things exist for the income stream. There's always a downside to that kind of thing. It's expensive, it's inflexible, there's issues. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. And if you haven't built your wealth enough that you can live comfortably without drawing down your principal, then you have to consider other strategies. And they're not always, we spend a lot of our lives in Plan B.
Yeah, some people talk about reverse mortgages, which around the time of the GFC, there were a lot of shonky contracts that were drawn with that arrangement. I feel for the people who got stuck in those where it wasn't properly regulated, and that's changed since the GFC. But that's a tough situation for people where they find themselves in that situation where their only asset is the home that they live in.
Yes, and similar to annuities, reverse mortgages have their place. There are situations where they're truly a godsend, and then there are situations where they're predatory and inappropriate and are a disaster. And so some of this comes down to where you get your advice.
Yep.
I would not encourage people to get advice about reverse mortgages from someone who sells reverse mortgages. Get advice from someone who's a financial advisor who doesn't sell anything and who can look at 6 different options and say, none of them work for you, or several of them do, or here's the best one. But, much like any mortgage broker, a mortgage broker, when you go to buy a home, they're not going to tell you how much house to buy. They're going to tell you how much you can buy. And that's because they're going to be paid more, usually, based on how much you borrow. So if they say you can qualify for $1 million mortgage, that doesn't mean you should have $1 million mortgage. It might mean you could pay the bill, but you might not be eating particularly well for a while. So I think you should try to avoid getting advice, no matter which kind it is, from someone who sells the product designed to solve the problem that they're identifying.
That is so logical. And a lot of people actually do exactly what you're saying. They're not looking at things objectively, and that's where it becomes quite dangerous, isn't it, for people?
I think it is. And understand that, in my opinion, those products aren't good or bad. They can be used properly or improperly. And so, one thing that we certainly look at in the U.S., and I would suspect it's worldwide, is elder abuse and taking advantage of seniors who sometimes are not at their full capacity to make various decisions at a given point in time, and are sometimes easy prey for someone who's not going to be scrupulous. And unfortunately, annuities, reverse mortgages, and those kinds of things, which tend to be sold by people who then do not have a relationship with you afterwards. They sell something to you, make a bunch of money, and then move on to the next, I'm not even going to say customer, I'm going to say victim, because frankly, that's usually what it is. And maybe that's hyperbole, but I do think there's a place for these things. There are tools that can be used really, really wisely. You just have to know where you're getting that advice and make sure that advice is catered to you and not catered to what someone is trying to sell.
Okay, Great. Look, I mean, everybody needs to know these things. We often don't talk about it until it's too late. And you were talking about people perhaps in their 60s and 70s. That's the age group where people may need that income. But should somebody be planning for that 10 years before? So say when they're around 50, they're planning for their 60s and 70s, or when they're 40, if they want to retire at 50, they need to plan at 40 for 50.
Yes, I think you start planning 5 to 10 years before your proposed retirement date to transition to income. That does not mean go out and buy those products or position money that way. It means be thoughtful about the shortening time frame between growing your assets and needing to draw on those assets. And ideally, you'll be drawing on them and growing them simultaneously. You know, that would be the hope, is that you can outpace inflation and that you can essentially give yourself a raise every year by the cost of goods and services. So you want to still be growing your money even if you're 75 or 80 or 85.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of, you're familiar with Monte Carlo simulations?
No.
And I don't know how you feel about them. A Monte Carlo simulation, which sounds like a game, is a simulation that gives you a percentage based on all the possible outcomes, a percentage chance of success. And I've seen these plans where someone says, you have an 83% chance of not running out of money by 88 years old. And I look at that and say, well, you have a 17% chance of being broke at 87. That's lousy. You know,
I've seen the models where they actually model the spending of retirees. So they show that once you hit, I think it's about 75, your spending drops off significantly. So there was this whole controversy in Australia, I'm not sure if it was in the US as well, where some financial planners were out there saying, oh, you need X amount for retirement. And this one guy came out in the media and he just said, that's total rubbish, that people don't need to have, $1.5 million to be able to retire comfortably. And he came up with some completely different numbers, and depending on someone's personal situation, of course, has to be factored in there. But people were all worried about the fact that they didn't have enough for retirement. So it was building on those beliefs of years ago where people, we talked in previous interviews about how it comes down the family of where things are not enough. And you have people who have got significant assets even, you mentioned before, that don't think that they can retire until somebody actually sits them down and says, hey, there's a graph online, you can quickly go to this website. There's government websites here in Australia and probably US ones as well, where you can go there, look at models and see how much money you're going to need in retirement based on what you've got today and your spending, etc. But they haven't even looked at that, so they're forever just continuing to work and thinking that they've got to keep working and not planning properly, as we're talking about today. So, I mean, there's that whole, mindset, and then the lack of planning and having nobody actually say, stop, just for one moment and just take a look at the numbers.
You're certainly right that some spending decreases as you get older. But I would argue there are two things that cause the lives of seniors to get more expensive, not less expensive. One of them is that seniors face a higher inflation rate than the rest of us. You say, well, how is that possible? It's because of the things that seniors spend money on don't inflate like groceries. If you're healthy, it's leisure and entertainment. That has no bearing on the cost of bread and milk. If you're not healthy, it's medical care. And health care is spiraling in terms of its cost. And then a lot of times it's also education for grandkids, because parents are having trouble figuring out how to pay for their own. And so a lot of grandparents are helping with those kinds of things. So I think it is logical that some spending will be reduced, particularly routine spending. I don't know that many 80-year-olds who buy a lot of clothing, for example. I mean, sometimes they probably should, but the fact that they don't a lot of the time, it is what it is. But those other things, if they're healthy and they're taking vacations, I do think that the number for retirement is bigger than most people realize. And I'm troubled by some of those simulations that say you only need 70% of your pre-retirement income.
So what you're saying is the budgeting side of it is really important as they're nearing retirement.
It is. And I would say it's a great goal to try to find a way to replace 100% of your pre-retirement income net of your savings So if you make $100,000 a year and you save $20,000 a year in your retirement plans or other things, what you need to replace is $80,000. That's the difference.
Yes.
And then you need to replace that in a way that can grow for inflation so that it doesn't, so your purchasing power doesn't suffer. I think it's a great goal to shoot for 100%. If you shoot for 100% and you get to 89%, you're going to be okay. If you shoot for 70% and you come up short, you might not be okay. So I think it's great to shoot for 100% and to recognize that life isn't a game of perfect.
Yeah, planning for the what ifs is really important, isn't it? Because you don't know what could be around the corner. You think that you're going to be healthy and then get to retirement age and then something could happen. You just don't know.
Well, and it could be health. It could be the loss of a spouse. It could be that your mom or dad lives to be 112 and you're helping them with their bills. I mean, we just, the variables are infinite. And the similarities the similarities between families are really tough to gauge because everyone is different. Every situation is different, whether it's health or family dynamics or residence or taxes or the timing of it. You know, we haven't mentioned at all in any of our conversations about sequence and series of returns. But there's an enormous amount of research that shows that the returns that you get, if the first year of your plan is a disastrous year, it can impact your plan forever. And some of that is luck. For the people who retired in 2007 and thought they were in great shape and then for one reason or another positioned themselves where they had a total return strategy and they had to sell some securities during 08 and 09 during the crisis, they'll never recover. They're not recovered now. And that's just bad luck. Those same people, had they planned to retire in 2010, would have been able to ride that out, maybe work an extra year or two and been perfectly fine. So some of it's luck.
Yeah, it is
and
timing.
You can deflect some of that luck with strategy, but you can't deflect all of it. Life's going to happen.
Yeah, look, I mean, some of our clients that came to us had been through the GFC and had that exact experience. So they had to work potentially an extra 4, 5, 6 years beyond where they wanted to, which was really hard for a lot of people because they were tired and they were wanting to retire, we found, and for all different disciplines and for different reasons. But, you know, and then it was the challenge of what to put the money in at that point after the stock market had fallen and being already at a point where you want to retire. And, you know, this is one of the reasons, Eric, why we encourage people to learn about the stock market as much as they possibly can well before they get to that point. We find that clients come to us a lot of clients come to us in the sort of 40s, really, 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s. And, you know, some of them will say, oh gosh, you know, had I learnt this years ago, I'd be in such a completely different position. And I'm sure you get clients saying the same thing to you, but it's about asking the questions and start making inquiries and start learning things as early as you possibly can so that you're better prepared for retirement. We've got clients who are either in the process of planning to give up their full-time work or they've already retired and are earning income from the stock market. So it is possible to do these things. It's just a question of, you know, what do you need to be able to prepare for that? And you need to ask questions, but you need to do a bit of research first to get on that path.
I would agree with you, and I would say it's not just what you need, but also what you want. You know, if we survived on what we needed at a basic level,
yes,
we might not be living the way we'd particularly like to live. We'd be living. So I think it's okay to satisfy some of our wants also. These don't have to be ridiculous. It could just be that you want to be able to visit your grandchildren 3 times a year, wherever they live, or that you want to be able to do some things. No, it's not a need. It's not oxygen or water, but it is part of what makes life worth living. And so I think it's okay to plan for things that go beyond your basic needs. You know, Maslow's hierarchy is at play here, where you have self-actualization at a given point, and that matters. I think it's okay to plan for some wants, and starting early matters. And the greatest gift that we can give our children and grandchildren, there are basically 2 types of things, and I don't mean love and affection. That's clearly there, but I'm talking about tangible types of gifts. One of them is the gift of knowledge so that you can make sure that they're educated and they're getting this early.
Definitely.
Because if your kids are funding retirement plans at 16 or 18 or 20, they're going to be so much better off by virtue of having started. The other is the gift of influence. And the gift of influence is different than the gift of wealth. The gift of influence might mean that you leave behind a charitable fund and that your kids are going to manage that charitable fund and learn not only the value of a dollar, but to give away your money to nonprofits that are near and dear to you or to them or both. And that gift, not only is it educational, but it also creates an incredible network of really good humans where you're going to meet the right kinds of people because you're in the right circles to do those things and to make a difference in your community. And so these are things that a lot of people don't think about. They think about stuff. They think about leaving behind the grandfather clock and the BMW.
Yeah.
But the reality is the things that are more valuable than that are usually they're usually knowledge or wisdom or vision or values or influence.
Yeah, look, that's really powerful. You know, it's really important, isn't it, to have that balance of the needs and the wants and to consider that human element in there. Look, I think that we've really done well in helping people to think about these things today. It's so important that people get on the right track and start planning well in advance of retirement, as you said, 5 to 10 years before that point. So if anybody's out there and they've been thinking about it and haven't done anything towards their retirement yet, maybe you're starting to build an investing portfolio, but maybe you're not sure about whether you're doing it the right way, then perhaps now's the time to chat with Eric and do your research and get a plan for your retirement. And the stages of going towards retirement as well is important, isn't it?
It is. And the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. Time is the most valuable resource you have at a given point. And so starting early matters. Getting in good habits matters. It's extremely difficult to get wealthy. It's extremely easy to stay wealthy. And so I consider the path to growing wealth very similar to the path of health and nutrition and so forth. It's very tough to get healthy. It's easier to stay there. So I don't think people should sit on the sofa and eat donuts until they're 70 and then decide to join the gym because now they have time, they're going to get healthy. It's the same thing with wealth. You don't blow every penny until you're 55 and then go, okay, now it's time to start thinking about retirement.
Yeah.
It's a continuum.
Yeah.
And if you wait until you're 55 to start, I think you're going to be incredibly disappointed at your options. And I think you'll be, that's not to suggest that if you're 55 and you haven't started that you should just give up and throw your hands up. That's not true either. It's always better to start today than it is not to. But if you have kids, get them started sooner.
That'll be so much easier, isn't it? Creating that mindset for them at such a young age. Then you don't have to train stubborn adult children that don't want to shift the way they think.
Well, you do need to train them. You just don't necessarily have to train them on this.
Yeah. Eric Brotman, I've really enjoyed our chat today. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we go, can you please tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, there are resources online at brotmanmedia.com. I host a podcast that comes out every Thursday called Don't Retire, Graduate. Published a book and a workbook, and we're working on an online course now for that as well. It's a financial literacy tool. And then to learn more about what we do professionally, bfgfa.com is our website, and we hope you'll check us out.
Fantastic. Eric Brotman, thanks for talking with us today on Talking Wealth. We look forward to chatting with you again soon. Bye for now.
Anytime. Take care.
For more information on our guest in today's episode, visit the link on screen right now. For more Talking Wealth, visit flix.net, click on the On Demand section, and then click on Talking Wealth under the Finance section. That's flixx.net. Or visit wealthwithin.com.au, where we have hundreds of informational videos, live shows, and Talking Wealth podcasts. Talking Wealth was voted number 3 in stock market podcasts globally in 2018 by FeedSpot. For more information on our courses, visit wealthwithin.com.au.